Imagine a city that stood for over 1,000 years, a fortress of golden domes and marble columns guarding the gateway between two worlds. For generations, it withstood sieges, crusaders, plagues, and political chaos. It defied emperors, sultans, and time itself. This was Constantinople. But in 1453, the impossible happened. A teenage sultan with a vision of empire would do what no one had done before. He would break the walls. And with the roar of cannons, the cries of soldiers, and the silence of a fallen empire, the world changed forever. This is not just the story of a siege. It's the end of Rome, the rise of a new power, the moment the medieval world shattered and modern history began. Today, we unravel the siege of Constantinople, how the Byzantine Empire, once the most powerful force on earth, collapsed in fire, blood, and steel, and why its fall still echoes through history. The fall of Constantinople on May 29, 1453, marks one of the most defining moments in world history. It brought an end to the Byzantine Empire, an empire that had existed for over 1,000 years, and signaled the rise of the Ottoman Empire as a dominant force in both Europe and Asia. This was not simply a military conquest or a change in political leadership. It was the end of the last remnant of the Roman Empire, which had survived the fall of Rome in the West by nearly a millennium. The collapse of Constantinople marked the closing of the medieval era and accelerated the transformation of Europe and the Near East into the early modern world. For centuries, Constantinople stood as a bastion of Orthodox Christianity, a cultural and economic hub, and the centerpiece of a once mighty empire. Its massive walls had withstood countless assaults, from Persian invaders to Arab sieges, Bulgarian raids, and even the Crusaders themselves. But in the 15th century, the city was reduced to a fraction of its former power. Its population diminished, its resources strained, and its territory barely stretching beyond the city walls. Meanwhile, a powerful and rapidly expanding empire had grown around it. The Ottoman Turks, under the leadership of a young and ambitious sultan named Mehmed II, sought to take the city not only for its strategic value, but for its symbolic power. To them, it was the crown jewel, the gateway between East and West, and the true heart of empire. This video will explore, in full detail, every element that led to the fall of Constantinople. We will examine the centuries of political fragmentation and economic collapse that weakened the Byzantines, the rise and military evolution of the Ottomans, the defense and structure of the city itself, the characters involved on both sides, and the brutal siege that brought it all to an end. We'll also explore what happened after the fall, how Mehmed II transformed Constantinople into Istanbul, how the Orthodox Church survived under Islamic rule, and how the fall of this ancient Christian stronghold sent shockwaves through the Catholic West and sparked major cultural and political changes across the world. By the end of this documentary, you will understand not only how Constantinople fell, but why it mattered, then and now. The Byzantine Empire was not born in a single moment, but rather emerged gradually as the eastern half of the Roman Empire evolved into something new. When Emperor Diocletian divided the Roman Empire in 285 AD to better govern its vast territory, the East began to function increasingly independently. In 330 AD, Emperor Constantine the Great formally shifted the imperial capital from Rome to Byzantium, renaming it Constantinople, City of Constantine. Unlike the Western Roman Empire, which fell in 476 AD to Germanic invaders, the Eastern Empire survived. It had more wealth, a denser population, stronger urban infrastructure, and a strategic geographic position, surrounded by water and positioned between Europe and Asia. Over time, this Eastern Roman Empire adopted a Greek-speaking identity and increasingly focused on Orthodox Christianity as a cultural and unifying force. What we now call the Byzantine Empire was, in its own time, simply called the Roman Empire. Its citizens called themselves Romans, and Constantinople was the new Rome. At its height, under Emperor Justinian I in the 6th century, the Byzantine Empire nearly reclaimed the full territory of ancient Rome. Justinian's generals, Belisarius and Narses, recaptured Italy, North Africa, and parts of Spain. Meanwhile, Constantinople itself flourished as a global metropolis of over 500,000 people. Justinian also codified Roman law in the Corpus Juris Civilis, which later became the foundation of many modern legal systems. He oversaw the construction of the Hagia Sophia, a monumental cathedral that stood as the largest in the world for nearly 1,000 years. Culturally and intellectually, Byzantium was a beacon of learning, preserving and transmitting ancient Greek and Roman texts during times when much of Western Europe had lost them. Its military strength was supported by the theme system, a decentralized method of landholding that ensured local military readiness. And yet, despite these strengths, cracks began to form. From the 7th century onward, Byzantium entered a prolonged period of contraction and crisis. Arab-Muslim conquests swept through the Middle East, seizing Syria, Egypt, and North Africa, cutting off vital sources of revenue and manpower. Constantinople endured multiple Arab sieges, notably in 674 to 678 and 717 to 718, saved only by its walls and a secret weapon known as Greek fire. Later, the empire clashed with Bulgarians, Seljuk Turks, and Norman invaders. Internal civil wars and palace coups further destabilized the state. The Fourth Crusade in 1204 was a catastrophic turning point. Latin crusaders sacked Constantinople itself, looting churches, killing civilians, and shattering Byzantine power. For 57 years, the city was under Latin control until the Byzantines retook it in 1261. But by then, the damage was done. The empire never recovered. Constantinople was a shadow of its former self, underpopulated, underdefended, and economically stagnant. In the final centuries before the siege, the Byzantine Empire was confined mostly to Constantinople and a few scattered territories like the Despotate of the Morea. The once mighty imperial army was gone. The empire had no fleet. The treasury was nearly empty. Civil wars among the Palaiologos dynasty drained what little resources remained. In some instances, Byzantine emperors became vassals of the Ottoman Turks, paying tribute and participating in their military campaigns. Meanwhile, the population of Constantinople had dropped dramatically, from over 500,000 at its peak to perhaps under 50,000 by the 1450s. The city's infrastructure was crumbling. Many districts were abandoned. Attempts were made to appeal to the West, especially through offers to reunite the Catholic and Orthodox churches. These efforts, however, were met with hostility at home and indifference abroad. When the final siege came, there was no army from Rome, no reinforcements from France or the Holy Roman Empire, only a handful of foreign volunteers, mercenaries, and a deeply fragmented city left to make its last stand. The Ottoman Empire began as a small Turkish beylik in northwestern Anatolia around the late 13th century. Its founder, Osman Thuatra, was one of many frontier warlords who rose to prominence after the collapse of the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum. His tribe, the Osmanawulları, or Sons of Osman, quickly distinguished itself for its military success and political flexibility. Unlike their neighbors, the Ottomans were not confined by tribal loyalties. They absorbed and employed Christians, Greeks, Armenians, and Slavs in their administration. Early on, they saw the value of religious tolerance as a tool of statecraft, which allowed them to grow rapidly without constant rebellion. By the mid-14th century, the Ottomans had crossed into Europe via the Dardanelles, taking the city of Gallipoli in 1354, a gateway into the Balkans. From there, their expansion into Thrace and Macedonia was swift and relentless. Byzantine emperors, weakened and divided, often found themselves using Ottoman armies in their own civil wars, unwittingly empowering their future conquerors. The Balkans became the prime focus of Ottoman expansion in the 14th and 15th centuries. Under Murad I and later Bayezid IV, the Ottomans defeated Serbian, Bulgarian, and Hungarian forces, often decisively. The 1389 Battle of Kosovo became legendary for both sides. It solidified Ottoman power in the Balkans and became a cultural trauma for the Serbs. The Ottoman military system evolved rapidly. It included feudal cavalry, sipahi, and the elite Janissary Corps, infantry units made up of forcibly converted Christian boys raised as soldiers through the Devshirme system. These boys were trained from childhood to be utterly loyal to the Sultan, forming one of the most feared armies in the world. By the early 15th century, most of the Balkans, including Bulgaria, much of Serbia, and parts of Greece, were under Ottoman rule or heavy influence. Cities like Thessaloniki and Adrianople, modern Edirne, fell, while Constantinople stood increasingly isolated, a decaying relic surrounded on all sides by a young, hungry empire. Mehmed II, known as Mehmed the Conqueror, was only 19 years old when he ascended to the Ottoman throne for the second time in 1451. But unlike his earlier short reign as a teenager, this time he was prepared. Educated in philosophy, science, languages, and Islamic law, Mehmed was both a warrior and a statesman. His ambitions were clear from the outset. He intended not just to expand the Ottoman realm, but to claim the legacy of Rome itself. Constantinople was more than a city. It was the seat of emperors, a religious symbol, and the gateway between continents. Conquering it would not only unite his empire geographically, but also symbolically position him as the heir to both Islamic and Roman imperial traditions. Mehmed began immediate preparations. He restructured the military, improved the Janissary Corps, and crucially, commissioned massive siege cannons from a Hungarian engineer named Orban, capable of breaking even the legendary Theodosian walls. He also built the Rumeli Hisara fortress on the European side of the Bosphorus to cut off supplies and reinforcements to the city. To Mehmed, the fall of Constantinople was not just a goal, it was destiny. By 1452, Constantinople was almost entirely surrounded. The Ottomans controlled all of Anatolia, the Balkans, and the Bosphorus Strait. Mehmed II made his intentions clear by closing off the strait, attacking Venetian and Genoese ships, and demanding the surrender of the city. When Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos refused, preparations for war began in earnest. Mehmed amassed an army of approximately 80,000 to 100,000 troops, including janissaries, cavalry, siege engineers, and naval support. Meanwhile, the Byzantines could muster only around 7,000 to 8,000 defenders, including foreign mercenaries, most notably the Genoese commander Giovanni Giustiniani, who led 700 elite soldiers. The Ottomans began transporting ships overland around the chain-blocked Golden Horn, building floating bridges and setting up massive siege positions. It was clear that Mehmed would use every resource at his disposal, and Constantinople would have to withstand its greatest test yet. Constantinople's greatest natural defense was its geography. Built on a triangular peninsula bordered by water on three sides, the Golden Horn to the north, the Sea of Marmara to the south, and the Bosphorus Strait to the east, the city was nearly impregnable from every angle but the west. The narrow land approach was the only point an attacking army could realistically assault on foot. This position also gave Constantinople complete control over key trade routes between Europe and Asia. Any army moving between the continents had to reckon with the city, and any navy seeking to dominate the eastern Mediterranean had to control its harbors. Its port, the Golden Horn, was both a commercial hub and a defensive advantage. A massive chain could be stretched across its mouth to block enemy ships from entering. During the siege, this chain would prove to be both a key asset and a temporary obstacle to Mehmed's strategy. The legendary Theodosian walls, built in the 5th century under Emperor Theodosius II, were the most formidable fortifications in the medieval world. These triple-layered defenses stretched across the city's western approach for over 5 kilometers. The outermost wall was a low curtain wall with a moat in front of it. sometimes flooded to hinder attackers. Behind it stood a second, taller wall with towers placed every 55 to 75 meters. Finally, the main wall rose behind the second, a massive structure roughly 5 meters thick and up to 12 meters high, with towers standing as tall as 20 meters. These towers were used for archers, artillery, and lookouts, offering interlocking fields of fire. Over centuries, the walls had withstood dozens of attacks, from the Arabs, Bulgars, Avars, Russes, and more. Even during the Fourth Crusade, it took betrayal from within the city, not brute force, for it to fall. For Mehmed to succeed, he would have to do what no foreign army had ever done: breach the Theodosian walls with sheer firepower. While the Theodosian walls protected the western approach, other defensive systems reinforced the city. The sea walls along the Marmara and Golden Horn, though lower than their landward counterparts, were still formidable, especially with naval support. Towers such as the Tower of the Virgin, Galata Tower, across the Golden Horn, though not under Byzantine control during the siege, gave commanding views of the city's approaches. The city was also divided internally by forums, gates, and steep terrain, which could be used for layered urban defense if the outer walls were breached. Key city gates, like the Gate of St. Romanus, would become focal points during the siege. It was here that Mehmed's artillery concentrated its bombardment and where the final breach occurred. Inside the city, the Hagia Sophia and other major churches loomed over the skyline, a final testament to a once mighty empire. They would soon witness history's turning point. The defense of Constantinople was led by Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos, a courageous and tragic figure. Though he knew the odds were against him, he refused to flee or surrender. His leadership during the siege would later become legendary. The city had roughly 7,000 to 8,000 defenders, a mix of Byzantine soldiers, Greek militia, and foreign allies. Chief among them was Giovanni Giustiniani, a Genoese mercenary commander who brought 700 well-trained troops. His knowledge of gunpowder warfare and artillery defense was critical in the first weeks of the siege. The defenders had limited cannons, older weapons, and dwindling supplies, but high morale and a deep spiritual conviction that they were defending the last bastion of Christian Rome. Yet morale was also fragile. Political divisions, religious disputes, and fear of abandonment by the West simmered below the surface. Every day that the siege continued brought new doubts, but as long as the walls held, hope remained. In late 1452 and early 1453, Sultan Mehmed II began assembling one of the most sophisticated and diverse armies of the 15th century. His force is estimated to have numbered between 80,000 and 100,000 men, dwarfing Constantinople's defenders nearly tenfold. This wasn't a simple horde, it was a carefully organized war machine. At its heart were the elite janissaries, disciplined infantry raised from childhood through the Dev-Shayami system. Clad in uniforms, armed with muskets and crossbows, they were considered among the best-trained soldiers in the world. Supporting them were Sipahi cavalry, Ottoman feudal knights who would harass supply lines and ride down fleeing enemies. Engineers, sappers, and laborers followed behind, constructing roads, towers, siege engines, and logistical camps. Mehmed's army was multi-ethnic: Anatolian Turks, Balkan converts, Balkan Christians, even renegade mercenaries and former Byzantines. This was not just a Muslim army, it was a force forged by centuries of empire building. Unity came not through culture, but through purpose. Constantinople was the prize that would make Mehmed a legend. One of Mehmed's boldest and most innovative moves was hiring Orban, a Hungarian artillery engineer. Orban had first offered his services to the Byzantines, but they couldn't afford his price or feed his ambitions. Mehmed welcomed him with open arms and a blank check. In Edirne, Orban built the largest bombard Europe had ever seen, the Basilica cannon. Weighing over 18 tons, with a barrel nearly 30 feet long, it could fire a stone projectile over half a meter wide, weighing up to 600 kilograms, 1,300 pounds. Even smaller companion bombards packed destructive power, that no medieval wall could withstand for long. Transporting these monstrous cannons from Edirne to Constantinople was a feat of engineering in itself. Hundreds of oxen, reinforced wagons, teams of engineers and laborers were mobilized to move the siege train across rough terrain. When these weapons were finally set up outside the Theodosian walls in April 1453, their thunder shook the ground. For the first time, Constantinople's walls were truly vulnerable, not to ladders or arrows, but to the brute force of gunpowder revolution. In addition to land power, Mehmed understood the strategic need to control the sea. Constantinople depended heavily on supplies brought in through the Golden Horn and the Bosphorus Strait. Mehmed's goal was to cut the city off from all directions. He assembled an Ottoman navy of over 100 ships, a mix of galleys, smaller vessels, and supply boats. Crewed by sailors from Anatolia and the Aegean, many of these ships were built in the months leading up to the siege, as dockyards worked around the clock under the supervision of Admiral Baltaolu. Yet the city had a trick, the great chain that blocked the Golden Horn. Mehmed's response was audacious. In late April 1453, he ordered ships to be hauled overland on greased planks and logs, bypassing the chain entirely. The sight of Ottoman ships appearing behind the city's northern sea wall was a psychological blow to the defenders, and a masterstroke of siegecraft. The water, once Byzantium's strongest ally, had turned against it. By early April, the Ottoman siege lines were complete. Encampments ringed the land walls from the Sea of Marmara to the Golden Horn. Wooden palisades, observation towers, artillery positions, and supply roads transformed the once quiet hills into a military engine. Sappers began digging underground tunnels to try and undermine the walls, though Byzantine counterminers often fought brutal subterranean battles to intercept them. Towers were built to shield bombards. Tents for thousands of troops stretched into the hills, while massive food stockpiles and water reserves sustained the siege. Crucially, Mehmed had established a forward command base, a central tent fortified with guards and lined with maps, mirrors, flags, and communication devices like horns and runners. From here, he observed, adjusted, and issued orders like a modern general. The siege was no longer a matter of if. It was now only a matter of when. At dawn on April 6, 1453, Constantinople shook with the first thunder of Ottoman cannons. The Basilica cannon, alongside dozens of smaller bombards, began their work in earnest, targeting key sections of the Theodosian walls, particularly the Gate of St. Romanus, where the ground was most level. The defenders had never heard such a sound. The earth trembled with each detonation, and stone shattered into clouds of dust. The Byzantines rushed to repair breaches with wood, rubble, and even the stones of nearby buildings. Teams worked day and night to patch up each new hole. But gunpowder had changed the rules of siege warfare. The ancient walls, built to withstand ladders and catapults, could not hold forever against repeated artillery barrages. Mehmed rotated his bombards to keep them cool and intact, employing precision and patience. His strategy was no mere storm. It was a slow disintegration. Still, the defenders endured. Giustiniani's men, expert in counter-artillery tactics, absorbed shock after shock. Repairs were constant. Morale remained high, for now. Though the bombardment was constant, direct assaults were limited in the early days. Mehmed wanted to wear down the walls and defenders before risking mass casualties. Instead, he deployed skirmishers, archers, and sappers to harass the walls by day and disrupt defenses at night. At night, under moonlight and torchlight, Ottoman troops launched quick raids, testing the walls and forcing the defenders to stay alert and exhausted. Byzantine archers, sometimes perched atop the triple walls, responded with flaming arrows and boiling oil. The fighting was brutal, short, and terrifying. On the ground, mining operations intensified. Ottoman sappers tunneled under key wall sections, attempting to detonate explosive charges and collapse the foundations. However, the Byzantines had experienced counterminers who fought hand-to-hand battles underground, sometimes by listening for digging and collapsing tunnels by hand. sleep became rare. Tension inside the city escalated. Every night brought the risk of surprise attacks, sabotage, or sudden death in the dark. Despite hauling ships overland into the Golden Horn, Mehmed still needed to break the sea blockade to fully encircle the city and bring in more supplies. On April 20th, 1453, the first and only major naval clash of the siege occurred. A small fleet of 3 Genoese ships and a Byzantine transport, filled with grain and reinforcements, attempted to break through the Ottoman blockade. Mehmed dispatched dozens of galleys to intercept them. What followed was a tense naval battle just outside the city's harbor, visible from the walls and hills. Against all odds, the heavily armored Christian ships held out. Using their height and superior crew coordination, they managed to ram, repel, and set fire to several Ottoman vessels. Eventually, with help from the defenders, they broke through the chain and reached the harbor safely. It was a humiliating moment for Mehmed and a burst of morale for the city. But it would not happen again. The Sultan tightened his grip, bringing more ships into the Golden Horn and launching attacks against the sea walls. His navy would adapt and escalate. As the siege wore on, Emperor Constantine XI sent desperate appeals to Western Europe, especially to the Pope, Venice, Genoa, and the kings of Hungary and Aragon. He begged for fleets, armies, even small reinforcements. The West, however, was divided and sluggish. Religious politics further complicated things. The recent Council of Florence, 1439, had tried to reunite the Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches, but this union was deeply unpopular in Byzantium. Many Orthodox citizens preferred martyrdom over Catholic submission. Still, some help did arrive. A few Genoese and Venetian ships and mercenaries slipped into the city, but no great crusading army came. Western Europe was too concerned with its own wars. England and France were just emerging from the 100 Years' War, while the papacy was politically entangled. Constantinople was, in the eyes of many, already lost. By mid-May, the walls around the gate of St. Romanus were crumbling. Despite constant repairs, the bombardments were taking their toll. Cracks spread, towers collapsed, and morale began to crack with them. Inside the city, panic and despair spread. Food supplies dwindled. Disease began to appear in the crowded quarters. Religious processions snaked through the streets, praying for divine intervention. Some believed they saw signs and omens, a lunar eclipse, a halo around the moon, or a mysterious glow over the Hagia Sophia. Mehmed, sensing the walls' fatigue, began preparing for a massive final assault. His troops were ordered to rest. Weapons were stockpiled. Tunnels were reinforced. The defenders knew what was coming, but still, they refused to yield. Constantine XI gathered his men and delivered a final address. The city was on the edge of collapse, but its spirit still burned. As the sun set on May 28, 1453, both sides prepared for what they knew would be the final act. Inside Constantinople, Emperor Constantine XI held a last service at Hagia Sophia. Soldiers, priests, nobles, and commoners gathered in candlelit silence. Orthodox and Catholic Christians, divided for centuries, stood shoulder to shoulder, sharing a final Eucharist. Some wept, others prayed. Many knew they would not live to see another dawn. Constantine, clad in imperial armor, rode to the walls to speak with his troops. His words were brief but heavy. "I would rather die with my people than leave the city." His defiance turned to tragic heroism. Outside the walls, Mehmed gathered his generals. He promised the riches of the city to his soldiers, loot, gold, slaves, and glory, but warned that the Sultan's palace and religious buildings were to be spared. Fires lit the horizon as war drums thundered through the Ottoman camps. As midnight approached, the silence turned into a slow, methodical crescendo of war. At approximately 1:30 a.m. on May 29th, Mehmed gave the command. The final assault had begun. Waves of Bashi Bazouk irregulars surged toward the walls. Poorly trained but fanatical, these shock troops were meant to tire the defenders, force them to waste ammunition, and expose weaknesses. They attacked recklessly, climbing, shouting, and dying in droves under arrows, boiling oil and stones. Next came the Anatolian infantry, more organized and better armed. They pushed through gaps left by the dead, hammering at weakened wall sections with ladders and siege gear. Ottoman cannons fired intermittently to sow confusion, though many of the bombards had cracked from overuse. Giustiniani led the defense personally, rallying his men at the gate of St. Romanus, where the fiercest fighting occurred. The defenders held, barely. Blood ran through the broken stones. The dead piled up. The city was holding, for now. But Mehmed was waiting for his moment. At around 4 a.m., the Janissaries, Mehmed's elite, made their move. Tall, armored, and disciplined, they marched through the carnage, pushing deeper into the breaches, shields interlocked, chanting as they climbed. The final blow had arrived. The crucial moment came just after 4:30 a.m., when Giustiniani was gravely wounded, struck, accounts vary, either by a cannon fragment or a crossbow bolt. His men, demoralized, carried him from the walls. The defense faltered. The Kirkeporta, a small sally port near the northern wall, was either left open or breached, still debated today. Ottoman forces exploited this opening, pouring into the city from multiple directions. The gate of St. Romanus finally collapsed, and Janissaries stormed the city. Constantine fought to the last, reportedly discarding his imperial regalia and throwing himself into the melee, never to be seen again. His fate became legend. The defenders broke. Some fought to the death, others fled. Chaos erupted in the streets. Constantinople had fallen. As the sun rose, Mehmed's army poured into Constantinople. Despite his orders to spare certain sites, the city was subjected to the traditional 3-day pillaging allowed by Islamic law. Churches were broken into, monasteries looted. Thousands of civilians were killed, raped, or enslaved. Women and children were dragged through the streets. The once proud capital of Christendom became a nightmare of blood and fire. The Hagia Sophia, a symbol of Christian majesty, was stormed by soldiers. Worshippers inside were either massacred or enslaved. By noon, a muezzin had climbed to the pulpit to declare it a mosque. The city's libraries, artworks, and relics, many of them priceless remnants of the classical world, were destroyed or stolen. The Byzantine Empire, a 1,000-year-old civilization, had ceased to exist in a single morning. At midday on May 29th, Sultan Mehmed II rode through the gates of Constantinople, not as a barbarian conqueror, but as a ruler claiming his prize. He ordered his guards to protect surviving citizens, called his troops to stand down, and went directly to Hagia Sophia. There, he dismounted, entered the building, and prostrated himself in prayer. From that moment, Constantinople became Istanbul, and Hagia Sophia became a mosque. Mehmed was only 21 years old. His conquest shocked Europe and reshaped the Islamic world. He would soon be known not just as Mehmed the Conqueror, but as Caesar of the Romans, a title he claimed by right of conquest. The medieval world had ended. A new empire had begun. The Byzantine Empire, which had lasted for more than 1,100 years, was no more. Its final emperor, Constantine XI Palaiologos, died sword in hand, defending the last remnant of the Eastern Roman world. For centuries, Byzantium had been a bastion of Roman governance, Greek culture, and Christian theology. With its fall, the line of emperors stretching back to Augustus came to an end. The imperial bureaucracy, scholarly institutions, and aristocracy were largely wiped out in a single blow. But the empire didn't vanish overnight. Many Greeks fled, scholars, nobles, artisans, taking their knowledge with them. Some traveled to Crete, others to Venice, and many to Italy, where they helped spark a new intellectual awakening, the Renaissance. Yet for the Eastern Orthodox world, the fall of Constantinople was not just the end of a state. It was the loss of a sacred center, a new Rome, and a source of deep trauma. Sultan Mehmed II immediately set to work transforming Constantinople into the capital of the Ottoman Empire. He repopulated the city, inviting Muslims, Christians, and Jews to settle within its walls. Mosques were built, markets reopened, and infrastructure repaired. Though looting had devastated many areas, Mehmed envisioned the city as a cosmopolitan hub at the heart of his growing empire. Crucially, he allowed the Orthodox Patriarchate to remain and protected Christian and Jewish communities under the millet system, giving them relative autonomy in exchange for loyalty and taxes. This model would define Ottoman governance for centuries. The Hagia Sophia, now a mosque, became a symbol of the empire's new power. Constantinople, soon called Constantiniye or Istanbul, was no longer just a city. It was the beating heart of a global superpower. The fall of Constantinople shocked Europe. Panic spread through Christendom. If the queen of cities had fallen, what was next? Rome? Vienna? The Pope called for a new crusade, but it never materialized. Western Europe was too divided and exhausted from internal conflicts. Some nations, like Venice and Genoa, instead focused on protecting their trade routes and cut deals with the Ottomans. Yet the psychological impact ran deep. The city's fall was seen as divine punishment for Christian disunity, particularly the split between East and West. The schism, long debated in theological terms, now had blood on its hands. At the same time, the influx of Greek scholars and texts into Italy had an unexpected effect. As they brought ancient manuscripts and classical knowledge, they helped fuel the growing Renaissance, an ironic cultural rebirth sparked by an imperial death. With Constantinople in his hands, Mehmed II now ruled from the former capital of Rome's eastern half. But he didn't just conquer Byzantium, he absorbed it. He adopted the title Caesar I Rom, Caesar of Rome, and positioned himself as the legitimate heir to the Roman imperial tradition. He styled his court after Byzantine models, married noble Greek women, and embraced the imperial grandeur of Constantinople to legitimize his rule to both Muslims and Christians. The fall of Constantinople marked the true beginning of the Ottoman Golden Age. The empire expanded deeper into the Balkans, conquered the rest of Anatolia, and by the 16th century reached as far as North Africa, Persia, and Hungary. Istanbul became one of the most important cities in the world, a melting pot, a military powerhouse, a trade hub, and a center of art and learning. The Ottomans didn't just replace Byzantium, they became its spiritual successor, in their own image. Even today, the fall of Constantinople resonates. The city remains a symbol, a turning point, and a mystery. For the Eastern Orthodox world, it is a tragedy, remembered in liturgy and legend. Greek songs and laments still mourn the city that was lost. Some even believe in the Marble Emperor myth, that Constantine XI was turned to stone and will return one day to reclaim the city. For the Islamic world, it is a moment of triumph, fulfilling prophecies and solidifying Mehmed's place as a legendary leader. The conquest is celebrated to this day, and May 29th is marked in modern Turkey as a national milestone. For historians, Constantinople's fall is seen as the end of the Middle Ages and the beginning of modern history, a hinge in time where old empires died and new ones were born. It was a collision of civilizations, but also a merging of legacies. The fall of Constantinople on May 29th, 1453, marked the end of an era. The Byzantine Empire, which had once been the glorious heir to Rome, fell to the Ottomans in a cataclysmic event that reshaped the world's political, cultural, and religious landscapes. The walls that had stood for centuries, walls that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the struggle between East and West, and the spread of Christianity, finally crumbled under the siege of a determined sultan, Mehmed II. But even in destruction, Constantinople's legacy lives on. Though the city itself was transformed and became the heart of the Ottoman Empire, the fall of Constantinople also sparked a chain reaction that profoundly impacted the West, the East, and the entire course of world history. The Renaissance, born in the West, owed much of its inspiration to the Greek scholars who fled the city in the aftermath, bringing with them precious knowledge and ancient texts that would go on to shape the future of science, philosophy, and the arts. Europe's age of exploration, too, was indirectly influenced, as the collapse of Constantinople forced European powers to seek new trade routes to the east, leading to the discovery of the New World. For the Ottomans, the conquest of the Queen of Cities elevated Mehmed II to the status of a legendary ruler, transforming Constantinople into Istanbul, a thriving metropolis that would become the crossroads of civilizations for centuries to come. The Ottoman Empire flourished, and Islamic culture and influence would spread further into Europe, Africa, and Asia. Yet, the fall of Constantinople was not just the collapse of an empire, it was the end of a cultural world. The Greek Orthodox Church, which had long been a beacon of Christian spirituality, lost its central hub, and for the Orthodox Christian world, the loss was felt deeply as the spiritual heart of their faith was silenced. The event also left behind a series of unanswered questions about betrayal, lost opportunities, and what might have been had the West offered more support or if the city had resisted for just a little longer. Myths and legends continue to surround the siege, fueling the imaginations of those who seek to understand what truly happened on that fateful day. But the truth remains that history is rarely as clear-cut as we would like it to be. The fall of Constantinople was the result of a confluence of factors: military strategy, political intrigue, and the weight of centuries of conflict. It was the result of forces both external and internal, and its impact is still felt today. Today, the city of Istanbul stands as a symbol of the meeting point between East and West, a place where Byzantine and Ottoman legacies intertwine with the modern world. The Hagia Sophia, once the heart of Byzantine Christianity, now serves as a mosque and museum, representing the city's complex history and the legacy of an empire that, though fallen, will never be forgotten. The fall of Constantinople reminds us that empires rise and fall, but the legacy they leave behind shapes the world for generations to come. It teaches us about the fragility of great civilizations and the consequences of internal division, of political miscalculation, and of failure to act when action is most needed. As we reflect on the fall of Constantinople, we realize that history is not just a series of events. It's a mosaic of stories that continue to influence our lives today. It's a reminder that the past is always with us, shaping who we are, where we come from, and where we are going. And as we look at Istanbul, once Constantinople, we see a city that has lived through so much: the glory of Byzantium, the triumph of the Ottomans, and the modern challenges of the 21st century. It remains a city of immense cultural significance, a city that bridges worlds, and a city whose legacy will continue to reverberate for centuries to come.